Hello and welcome. So in here we'll be discussing about promises, and promises is just some way to define an asynchronous way to evaluate a particular computation. So for example, our application currently takes callbacks, and having a lot of callbacks be taken within callbacks and within callbacks, it's a very hard mental flow to maintain in your head, and really it kind of like results into some kind of code that is hard to maintain, especially when you are doing error handlings at different stages. We're doing error handling here. This is an error handling, but this is a normal standard error handling. But there are common error handlers that we're doing each and every time we make some asynchronous requests and doing some specific error handling. So in here we can simplify this by using promises, and a very simple example of creating a promise will be like, for example, in here I have a function called greet, right? I want to make this an asynchronous function. For example, maybe it's doing a database request or something else, or making a HTTP request. What I can do is that I can return a new promise, and a promise object takes a function that has a resolve. So this will be called when this is like fulfilled with a normal value, and reject when maybe there is an error or maybe it does not meet the requirements of what we want. But if you observe here, you can see TypeScript is telling us we should import this from Mongoose, but really we're not using the promise from Mongoose. Instead, we want to make use of ES6 promises, and ES6 promises is the promise that comes with Node.js. So that's why I wanted you to download something like from Node 5.0, but actually it starts from Node 4.0. So in here, to make sure that our TypeScript compiler knows that we are making use of ES6 features, we have to tell it with the tsconfig. And our tsconfig, if you notice that our target was EX5, but now I'll be targeting ES6, ECMAScript 6. So when we change that to ECMAScript 6, we will notice that right now here our promise will be like, if we check our compiler, cannot find name promise, but now it says that everything is fine. So how do we resolve a promise? So if everything goes fine, for example, we're gonna do some simple checks on this. If name is defined, right, then we want to resolve our greeting with something like, say, resolved, and let's say hello, and then plus the name. So this will be hello plus its name, the name that is being passed. Sorry, I misspelled it here. If name, so we have it like this. So if name is defined, then we'll resolve hello and give it the name, just give it a space here. But else, if it's not defined, then we want to just reject the promise. So to reject it is just gonna be pretty easy. We'll reject it, but it's a convention that when you are rejecting something, you should reject it with an instance of an error. So what I'll do is I will new up an error object, pass into the constructor the message. So we can pass it, let's say name needs to be defined and be a string. So we'll just reject like that, which is a way to define promise. So a promise has, like, in here we know that there are two states here. So when we return this promise, we're telling him that, hey, this is an asynchronous operation, and when this promise is resolved, just successful, if everything goes successful, call this. But if something goes wrong, then we want it to reject, and this will reject with an error telling us the rejection reason. So this is like a rejection reason. And this, how can we make use of this in our application? So for example, I will have a route here. So I will say a router.post. So we want a post route that when a user send, will send his name so that he can get a greeting. So we'll call this the greet route, And this greet route, what it will do is we'll take a function as usual, take a request, a response, and then what we'll do next is we'll get the name from the request.body. So when we get the name, we'll call our function. So our greet function is just, we'll just take the name, and then the thing about promises is that promises has a then, and this then method that we have here, when we say a then, a catch, and there are some other aspects of a promise that we can make use of. So as we can see here, this then is like when a promise is resolved successfully, its then method is called. So our then here is called, and it will pass in the value of what it was resolved to. So when we resolve this, it was resolved with a string called hello plus the name of the person. So what are we gonna do here? Our then is a function. We'll take a function, and it will take the result of that asynchronous operation that was resolved to. So this result, what can we do with this result? So in here, since we have the result, we can just send the result, right? So I will say res.send the result. So it will just send a string to greet the person based on the name he passed. And then, but if there is an error, it takes a second argument, which is also a function, but this function is like a rejection function, like unrejected function. So in here I will pass in a function, and it will take a rejection reason. So maybe we can call it an error since it's an instance of an error. So we'll just say like this, takes an error, and then this error we can then res dot maybe say status of 400 since it's an error, and then we'll send it to this user. So what we'll do is we'll send the error back to the user. So that's how we'll make use of a simple promise, and we can test this out in Postman and see how it works, or we can even use our unit test to test it out. So in here what we can do is I can go to my Postman, and in here, since it's under auth and greet here, so I can come here and say greet, and it's a post request, as you know it. And this post request, what it will take, it's just gonna take a simple name. So let me change this to application.json. So I'll take a name, and then I will take let's say Afar. I want it to greet me as Afar, so we'll send this post request, but I will need to start my server. So I can say I will use node daemon here. You can just use node www.bin.js, or I can use node daemon. Let me just use something you're familiar with. So I start my server and I make my request, and we can see that we have hello alpha here. And if I pass in say John, let's say I pass a name called John here, and I send it, it will evaluate this to this John and send our result back. And we can actually also write unit tests for this. So this will be like your own assignment to try and write a unit test for this request here, and maybe you can even write this one for this promise if you want a unit test for this promise.